Recebemos agora Marcos Laube, secretário-geral da GENA, Global Exchange Network Association, antiga EESPA, e CEO da Billentis, que nos apresentará as últimas novidades e tendências relacionadas com a faturação eletrónica. Welcome, Marcos.
So I have no clue whether that was a nice introduction or not. I hope it was. So good afternoon. Hope everybody is still awake. So let's start, as I don't exactly know what you told about Billentis, just very quickly. Billentis is a specialized consulting company for e-invoicing and tax compliance. And one of our main assets is the report that you can see on the left, which just has been published a couple of days ago about e-invoicing and tax compliance, which, by the way, probably will be provided, as I understand, by Sovos to all of you after the event. Otherwise, you would be able to download it at billentis.com directly to read it. Don't be afraid, it's a 90 pages report. So whenever you have problems to fall asleep at night, maybe that's a solution. But I hope it keeps you awake for the next 20 minutes at least, with some figures and some pictures that we want to share as one of the main findings of that report. And by the way, whatever I share with this presentation or what you can find in the report, you can reuse if you want, as long as you refer to Billentis as the source. This is fine with us. And now the first funny diagram, because we just saw it, so I don't really need to explain the idea of the diagram. But actually, this diagram inspired us for the title of the report, which is the Global E-Invoicing and Tax Compliance Report, Watch the Tornado. My partner, the speaker before, didn't mention the tornado part of it, because that's where we see e-invoicing currently. This is the stage of e-invoicing industry. It's in the middle of the tornado. It means like everybody is now looking for a solution because everybody needs to adopt to whatever is coming now. And actually it all happens between today and 2030. And that's exactly the time where all of you need to act. Obviously what we also see is that there's still little awareness, and that's why we sometimes talk about the silent revolution, because only a few people are aware of the massive changes that will bring to the way we work for all of us. Right? Therefore, we thought it's time to have that new report again. Let's have a look first of where we are today with e-invoicing. There are no real official numbers in terms of number of invoices globally and numbers of electronic invoices globally. That's why we had an intensive search for those numbers and trying to come up with this little map showing the maturity and the penetration of electronic invoices in the different countries. So you might be surprised with the color of some of those countries, which we categorize into 4 different ones, from leaders to laggards. But please note that those numbers don't only include B2B and B2C, it also includes something like G2C, which is often high numbers, but often also not yet really electronic. Right? So that's why that might be different. But in total, we came up with a number of 560 billion invoices that are exchanged on a global level. And where roughly 50% are in B2B and 50% are in B2C. And a bit surprising maybe as well, that only 16% of that volume is already electronic. And electronic in that respect includes PDF invoices, for example. So if we have a little dive into the different regions and what it means for Europe, for LATAM, etc., you can see that the development is kind of similar for all these different regions, both for B2C as well as B2B. We expect still a high growth, and the total number of electronic invoices seems to be something like 125 billion in 2024. And the only exception that you might realize on that diagram is Asia Pacific, where we expect an even higher growth, not only the last couple of years, but especially the next couple of years, the years to come, which is mainly due to electronic receipts, but we get there in a minute. So then maybe let's have a specific look on Europe, which we divided in a map in B2B and B2C. And in total, in Europe, we talk about 42 billion invoices that are exchanged all over Europe. Again, the share is 50-50 between B2B and B2C. But the paperless invoice share is already at roughly 45%. But a number that might also be interesting to you is that the share of structured e-invoices is only at 35% out of the 45. So in total, it's only roughly 15% that are already exchanged in a structured format, which means there's a long way to go still to be compliant with all the requirements that now come up in the different countries. And well, I mentioned Portugal specifically, of course, for today. Maybe again surprising for B2B, we see Portugal very advanced. B2C, there might be some more potential to have. And in total, by the way, we counted 860 million invoices for Portugal. When we then have a look at the numbers we expect for the next couple of years, and the forecast is until 28, the numbers or the graph doesn't look very exciting at the first glance, but still, when we look at the electronic invoices, conventional invoices, as we say, we expect the growth from roughly 90 billion to almost double the number to 175, 180 billion during this period. And it will certainly be even higher if we would extend the years. But what you can also see is that we expect a high rise of electronic receipts or personalized invoices, which is, and I think you know from Portugal partly at least, but many other countries, especially in Asia, change the way you get a receipt on the terminal, on the POS point of sale, if you buy something at the gas station or whatever. It's no longer anonymous receipts that you get, but you need to leave your name or your company, and it becomes a full invoice over time with all content which is required. And those kind of invoices also need to be processed to central platforms in the future. So that makes it kind of a full invoice that also needs to be considered. So, looking at those numbers, the question, of course, is for you as a multinational company, how to deal with it. And I just wanted to share some of those challenges and findings, because what we have seen that many companies today use a wide range of service providers for their different processes. So if we look at the inbound process for invoices, typically this is an average of 3 to 20 different service providers that is used. For the outbound, it's even worse. It can be up to 160 because you might be forced by specific customers to serve certain portals or whatsoever. And that's, of course, a massive number that you need to deal with. And with all these upcoming changes and requirements, that number will, of course, increase again by 2 to 6 per year. One other reason, obviously, is this number of new legal requirements. Well, we came up with 1,000. Earlier this morning, we heard about 14,000 a month. So maybe we have a slightly different definition. But nevertheless, the number of changes is, of course, huge. And therefore, we also see in the market that many multinational companies now try to reduce heavily that number of service providers to 1 or 2 in order to be able to manage the whole process with their partners. And those challenges that we see for the companies are, of course, multifold. If you only think about harmonizing the different processes, often those companies have 10 to 20 different ERP systems, they have different legal entities, they did acquisitions, et cetera, and all this needs to be considered. And if it's about compliance, really many, and maybe many of you as well, feel lost with all the requirements coming up, how to handle that massive volume and number of requirements. So, and what happened in the past is that really that was a very reactive approach. So whenever there was a requirement popping up in a country, the local entity maybe tried to find a solution, which then ended up in a number of many solutions for the whole company. And this will be changed. Well, we heard a lot about AI already this morning. So you could think about AI solving the whole problem automatically, and you don't need to do anything. But looking at the picture, you can maybe see that this is not yet the case. What I did, I asked AI to create a picture showing Bruno Koch, my co-author, and myself being exhausted from writing the report. And that's the picture that came up. I mean, I don't recognize myself. I don't know if you do. And even the typo in Tornado. So there are still things that don't really work. Nevertheless, many things do really work well. And one of the major things that are used by many companies, but also service providers already, is the extraction of data. Many struggled in the past to extract data from PDF invoices using OCR, ICR, whatever, with a quite low recognition rate, and then maybe only header data extracted from a PDF. Today, it's really easy and feasible, based on AI, to extract 100% of the data of an invoice on line item level. And that changes completely the way you can handle inbound invoices compared to the past. And this is not only true for PDF invoices, even for structured invoices. If you receive an EDIFACT invoice, an XML invoice, whatever it is, can easily convert it into something else which you need for your own ERP system. So handling inbound invoices becomes a lot easier based on AI. Obviously, I think we heard, if I understood the presentations correctly, something already about it. There's fraud detection, obviously. You can figure out about double invoices, wrong suppliers, etc. Quite easy use cases for AI. Same as predictive analytics to become aware about maybe cache issues that come up, etc. But we also see a couple of future applications. For example, AI might easily lead to a revival of blockchain, where it was quite calm during the last couple of years, but integrating AI with smart contracts, where you not only handle the invoice, but the whole process the contract, the order, integrate different parties that are involved, logistics, etc., then it might become more interesting again to also use blockchain in that context. Just quickly to mention things like dynamic pricing models that can be used. Dispute resolution is actually something that partly happens already, and predictive supplier and customer management as well. So there's more to come, and obviously every second week there are news about use cases in AI. So if AI doesn't solve the whole problem, what should you be aware of if you start an e-invoicing project? I really try to be quick now. And again, we heard a lot about all these different CTC models, continuous transaction controls. What we try to do in the report is to categorize those models that we see globally into 4 different categories. On the left, you see models where the e-reporting is quite separate from the e-invoice, so which causes a problem for companies because it's 2 different processes, right? So that's why we say it's e-invoicing is non-regulated in those cases. On the other hand, you have the models on the right, which is centralized exchange, for example, and one example was mentioned in Italy, where obviously the invoice and the e-reporting is the same process. And one model which we see coming up and which we actually support is what is called, strange name, decentralized CTC and exchange, or also called the 5-corner model, where you don't only have service providers acting on behalf of buyer and supplier, but also the tax authority as the 5th corner receiving the reporting data, which actually allows both the fulfillment of the requirements of tax authorities and business automation for the companies. So that's why we see this as a very beneficial model. And this is an example which is now used in France and also the Emirates, where it's mandated to use a service provider, but which allows for business automation. And the reason why I mentioned PEPL and GENA, GENA as the Global Association for E-Invoicing, is that those 2 associations are about to develop such a model based on the PEPL framework, which would allow all companies to use e-invoicing in the simplest manner possible. One more aspect when you start a project I wanted to mention is ESG. I think during the last couple of years, people almost forgot about ESG, and it's never really considered if you want to become tax compliant. Nevertheless, we try to really calculate the savings, CO2 savings that you get from one invoice, which is 120 grams CO2. And if you use it with the overall paper, which is still in the market, you would end up with 52 million tons of CO2 savings per year, which is both from production, not printing anymore, no ink, etc., but also from absorption, because 8,330 invoices can be produced from one tree. So that number saves you one tree. But they're not only environmental benefits of electronic invoicing, there are also social and governance aspects to it. Even though you hopefully can use those numbers if you're, for example, obliged to have an ESG report already, which is the case for about 50,000 companies already from January 24, and that will be mandatory for many more companies in the years to come. So as we know, many companies struggle to create that report, and that's why we also support the initiative that Carmen mentioned earlier to integrate that data into the invoice. And we also are in discussion with the European Commission. Ideally, from our perspective, that data would be included in the European data format to make sure it's available to all parties. And we just are about to start a pilot where a large buyer will ask their suppliers to already integrate that data to make that easier. So the next important aspect that we discovered is it's not only about e-invoicing if you start a project. It's much more than that, and we see different aspects that need to be and should be considered. Not only start e-invoicing because of tax compliance, look at the whole process, and won't mention it all, but there is payment, there is financing, there is order matching, e-sourcing, etc., which should be included. And if you look at the whole space, this is what we call the integrated digital trade, because it really covers the whole process between buyers and suppliers, even though that roadmap might be different for small companies compared to larger companies, because smaller typically rather focus on payment and finance, what we call the embedded finance solution, and larger ones rather go for the automation of the whole process, which then is the supply chain automation. Also, one recommendation that we have seen and calculated, if you look at the benefits starting a project, one thing which really is essential to start with is to centralize the whole process, because what we see is that companies, for example, receive invoices in all kinds of different jurisdictions, all different locations. Nobody really has an overview of the number of invoices. If we ask CFOs in the companies about the number of invoices, they hardly know the number because the process is too splitted between different departments, etc. So that is really the first thing to do. Then obviously starting to replace the still existing paper with electronic invoices, and then look at the other relevant processes to really make it a complete picture. And if we look at the invoice streams, a bit surprising maybe, but many have a huge saving potential only looking at the intercompany billing, which is often paper-based still. So only to do this electronic where you have the full control about the process saves you a lot of money. Then inbound is also often forgotten now that we all need to serve the tax compliance. It's mainly about sending. But don't forget about the inbound. The savings are typically even much higher compared to the outbound processes. And yeah, with the last slide, this is also because the data is not yet available electronically from all suppliers and all customers. You need to apply a certain strategy how to increase the electronic volume. And we differentiate between 4 different ones, starting with the classic approach, which means, well, you just wait and see actually. Whoever provides electronic data is welcome, but you don't really push until or to the what we call the loop e-order process, which really gives a benefit, for example, for your suppliers to send electronic invoices, because the only way you provide an order, which they're all looking for, is electronic. And in return, you will get the electronic invoice. So that obviously has the highest effect on the adoption rate and make sure you get a project successfully in time. So one of the main takeaways, hopefully showing those different slides is, and that's what I want to really give to you, is start e-invoicing now. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Marcus.